Hi everybody, my name is Amanda, and
my name's Kyle.
We're both from Team 1678 Citrus Circuits, and today we'll be presenting on student leadership.
So we're going to go over sort of how we do things as a team. Our team has some particular circumstances that may not apply, but hopefully things that we talk about will be applicable to all of your teams. At the end, we're also going to have a sort of discussion because we also want to learn from your experiences. You all have different experiences from us, so it's sort of great to get that bidirectional input. Cool.
And if you have any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand in the middle of the presentation. We'll answer them, but we can also do questions at the end. As I said, my name is Amanda Liu. Here on 1678, I am the captain of the team, so I do a lot of the administrative work, I do a lot of managerial work, and I basically manage a lot of the student aspects of the team. In addition to that, I'm also the business and media sub-team lead, so I lead one of our sub-teams. We'll talk about team structure later, to doing things like finances, PR, marketing, all that stuff.
My name's Kyle, as I said earlier. I'm the vice captain of Citrus Circuits, which means that I help her with any work that she needs to do. I also do a lot of the managerial work, and I work with her on all of that. I'm also the robot programming lead, which means that I organize and manage and set deadlines for our robot programming sub-team.
So we are current student leaders. We have been current student leaders for a little bit. I've been a leader for 2 years now, and this is Kyle's first year being a lead on our team. So we have some experience, and we're very passionate about leading our teams, but we are not experts at what we are doing. We're not perfect. We make a lot of mistakes, but we use those mistakes to learn and to continue and grow.
And also, as I said earlier, our team's circumstances may be very different from yours. So we may say things that are true in our experiences that you have not found to be the case. If you have a question, if you think that we are wrong at some point, or if you think that we are saying something that doesn't necessarily apply, feel free to ask questions. We may learn from this just as much as you guys do. Actually, quickly a little bit about our team, because I keep saying this. We have over 100 students. We work out of a high school, but we have students from all over the community, mostly from the high schools, the 2 high schools in our city and the junior high schools. So we're based out of a high school, but we're not necessarily a school team in the sense of a single school. So yeah, that's a little bit about our particular circumstances. So just jumping right into the actual leadership stuff. Mission and vision are sort of the core values of your team. They're how you actually phrase your team's specific goals, your team's vision, and your team's ideas. So the vision statement is effectively what the goals of your team are. I forgot actually to pull this up on my phone right beforehand, so I'm not going to say it right now, but our vision statement goes something like we aim to create the next generation of STEM innovators, something like that, right? It's talking about what your team wants to do. Your mission statement is more of how you're trying to achieve your vision. So that means that it's sort of some more specifics about how your program is run. It should still be very short, but in general, the mission is a little longer than the vision. And everything that your team does should be somehow encapsulated in the mission and vision statement, if that sort of makes sense.
So our team is divided into multiple sub-teams. That's how we basically divide our team. I know some teams call it divisions, some teams call it departments. We call them sub-teams. Going to the very top of this diagram, we have our core leadership, and our core leadership are the people who are making the executive decisions and basically running our team from an administrative standpoint. So for us, that includes our 2 head mentors, one of whom is just sitting right there, hi Harvey, as well as the captain, myself, and Kyle, our vice captain. Right after that, we have our leadership team, and our leadership team meets weekly to discuss what's happening on our team, different aspects of what's going on, issues that may arise, and ideas and goals for the future. So our leadership team is made up of the leaders of our various sub-teams. Our sub-teams are our mechanical sub-team, which is divided into mechanical design and mechanical fabrication, our electrical sub-team, our programming sub-team, and then our business and media sub-team. So out of these, we have a few of our leaders. Our mechanical sub-team has 3 leads since it's such a big sub-team. Then we have 2 programming leads, an electrical lead, a business media lead, and then our chairman's lead. Chairman's is not on the team structure. And then all of us meet weekly to discuss issues and things that arise for our team on a weekly basis. In addition to that, we also have auxiliary roles such as secretary, We do have some funds from our school district, and because of that, we act as a school club. So we have to have a secretary to keep notes and things like that. So we have a secretary for forms, for all the things that the school district kind of wants us to do for managing and keeping in touch with them.
So officially, our school only requires, I believe, a president of a club, it's called, and a secretary of a club, and I think maybe a vice president. But again, those auxiliary roles, mostly for us, are roles that are mandated by the school system for all clubs within that structure. So your mileage may vary on that and how those roles sort of fit in. Also, those auxiliary roles can definitely be, depending on how it's set up, they can definitely be students who are already leads on the team. So you can have people, our secretary, for example, officially speaking, is our electrical lead. So those auxiliary roles are not necessarily same amount of work as a normal sub-team position. It's, again, auxiliary. It's extra stuff that needs done that doesn't necessarily fit neatly into one of the extra roles. So at competition, the team is actually divided very differently. You don't necessarily have things divided neatly into sub-teams, right? You have your pit drive team. Those are the people working in the pit, and those are often completely separate from people who are working, in the stands or working with other teams, right? So you have some different separate teams within your team at competition. In particular, we have a very large scouting team. Scouting is a thing that we really like to do on 1678, and so we put a lot of resources at competition towards doing scouting stuff. Again, you may or may not have a dedicated scouting team, but you probably do have people in the stands watching or taking some notes, something like that. That's sort of the equivalent for a lot of teams of our scouting team.
So when we travel, we have designated roles for each member. Kyle kind of forgot to mention this, but we have designated pit drive. We have designated scouting team. We have people already assigned to these roles so that we don't have any confusion with people going back and forth between the stands or the pits or anything. So we do a thing like travel team selections. We're talking about that later, right? Yes. So that's where we basically designate roles instead of just having whoever can come, and then, we'll just divide up roles there. We try to organize everything right from the get-go so that we can do all the training that we need to do, and we don't have any confusion regarding that.
And again, a lot of that is because we are a very large team. We bring 44 members to events, so without those predetermined roles, it can be really difficult to keep track of everybody and make sure we don't lose students, which is a bad thing. And we will talk a little bit more about that later.
Speaking of losing students, we also have a few people set aside for logistics. Normally that is just the team captain, which is what I'm going to be doing this year, as well as a few designated parent chaperones who already have their jobs briefed with them and their kind of basic training going over. So, logistics. On our team, we like to call it cat herding because it can feel like that sometimes. So before a lot of events, we try to organize as much as possible, make sure that everything doesn't fall down the day of. So we create, for example, for competition, we do create itineraries at the beginning, about a month or two ahead of time. In these itineraries, we include the schedule of everything, the schedule of the event, schedule of when people are going down, schedule of when who needs to be where, at what time. Make sure to sign in too. Thank you. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, schedule for everything. If it needs to be pit, needs to be somewhere. If it needs to be scouting team, needs to be somewhere. When is curfew? When does everyone need to be back? All that kind of stuff. On the itinerary, we also include the meal plan. We share our itinerary with our students, our parents, and our mentors. Parents like to know what is going to happen and how their kids are going to be fed. So we do also try to provide meals for all of our students when they're traveling or at events. We have pre-designated parent coordinators to help with those meals, and we have them arrange all of that, and we put that on the itinerary and what's the meal plan for the event. And last thing, we also have transportation. So if it's an event that is not located near and we do need drivers or plane tickets, if it's World Champs or something like that, we try to include all that information on the itinerary. Another thing is that if you're doing logistics, you need to be very flexible. Just because you have everything written down doesn't mean that everything will go according to plan, because general rule of thumb, at least 1, 2, 3 things will go wrong that you did not expect. So you need to be very flexible, and you also need to be able to make decisions very quickly. If you're very wishy-washy on things, time can pass, and things can get even worse. So if you are in a position where you are managing something, logistics-wise, you need to be able to make decisions very fast and very decisively. And the last thing is communication. Usually for a travel team, if we are traveling to an event and everyone is all in about, the logistics person tries to have the contact information for every single person. So I store all 44 students' cell phone numbers on my phone. I also have all the parent chaperone numbers. So, if I ever need somebody, I can just pull out my phone and call them instead of scramble around and try to find them just like by walking around or something. We also try to make sure that our parent chaperones have all the numbers of their kids that they are managing for like carpools or something, or any of that. So flexibility and communication are extremely important when you're cat herding.
All right. Just because we are going really quickly through all of this, it'd be great if anybody had questions now. Just feel free to ask. I know we're sort of going over this all really quickly, so I don't want anybody to get lost or have a question that they have now and then they forget later. So does anybody have?
Yeah, so you mentioned the auxiliary leadership roles. Do those people also participate in weekly meetings?
Yes. So we basically just at a meeting go, any of our members, does anybody want to do this? And then we kind of make sure they're accountable and responsible for doing that, and then we have them do it. We don't take people outside of our team to do those auxiliary roles, if that makes sense.
Right, so those auxiliary roles are usually filled by a member of leadership already. Like I said, our electrical lead is our secretary. That sort of helps keep the sizes manageable, so we don't have 3 people there just for auxiliary roles or something like that. Those meetings keep a little tighter and a little bit more more focused, I guess. All right, so the team handbook is sort of where you set out your expectations, your goals, your rules for all the team members, and so it's sort of a really important document for all of your team members to have access to and to have read over. Just as a quick gauge, how many teams do have a student handbook here? Okay, so some but not all of you. Yeah, so we have a student handbook. Many other teams have actually published their student handbooks online. I believe off the top of my head, 1538 and I think 254 both have good student handbooks that are available online. So if you want, you can definitely check those out. Those are sort of models of what those should be like. But in general, the student handbook is the place for all of your students to be able to access the rules that you have written down. So for example, attendance, right? You often do want to hold your students to some standard of attendance, and that can be sort of tricky to enforce depending on how you're doing it. Written down so that if at some point you do need to enforce it, there is a very obvious precedent for that. It isn't something that you're, popping on somebody at the last minute. You suddenly say you're off the team because you haven't been to this number of meetings, just because that can be very frustrating for every party involved. So things like that, where you want to inform your team members of the things ahead of time. We also have general team policies, standards for behavior at competition, how team members are expected to behave. All that kind of stuff is outlined in the team handbook. It's also a really great place to detail a little bit about your team. So for example, if you have some team history that you don't necessarily want to spend a meeting going over, but you think that it would be good for some students to know about, right? Because it's sort of great to have those students engaged and sort of following the previous accomplishments of your team. So if you want team members to know about that, it's great to have those in the student handbook. The other important thing about the student handbook is that, yes, it does lay out these guidelines for other teams or for other team members to follow, but it also makes sure that they believe that they can trust you. Setting those things ahead of time, very far in advance of when those policies would actually be in place, makes sure that team members feel like they have that baseline of trust, which is really important for the relationship between the leadership team and the rest of the students. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but a poor relationship there can really be tough to.
So we try to update our team handbook yearly. That's kind of a fun bonding activity for our core leadership at the beginning of the year, is going through a 40, 50-page handbook together and editing all of it. We added new policies that we think weren't very apparent the previous year. We updated a few things. And we also put all the contact information for all of our student leaders in there, just in case somebody needs to reach somebody. It's just right there, accessible for all of them. Last thing we do in order to make sure that our students read the handbook is that we have a student contract that goes with it that outlines, I as a member of 1678 Citrus Circuits have read over this document and do agree to all the guidelines outlined here. And then there's a signature for our students, there's a signature for our parents so that we can hold them accountable if they come complaining to us. And we have them sign it, turn it into us as part of our registration process to make sure that every student does recognize that there is a handbook that they can refer to for expectations for our team. Communication is the key. So communication can be a little tricky at times. We completely understand that. Sometimes when you send a message, not everyone gets that message, or people don't really read thoroughly and they don't understand the message, and things can go awry through that. Whenever we communicate, we make sure that it is the communicator's responsibility to make sure that everyone they are communicating to receives that message. So clarity in your message is extremely important. If you're sending an email about something important, it's good not to have the important bits buried in text, or not buried in text, so that people can just receive that easily, or just like bolding your emails or something like that. And another thing is to make sure that you follow up in case somebody didn't read it or they skipped over it or something like that, especially if it's an important message. For really extremely important things like making sure that everyone can confirm to an event that we don't have time conflicts, we do make sure that people confirm back to us, reply back to us, or fill out a form so that we do get confirmation that everybody has received this message. Because really, if a message does not go across, it is the communicator's fault, not the receiver's fault.
Yeah, so maybe a better, more positive way to explain that instead of saying fault. It is sort of the responsibility of the communicator, of you as student leaders, to make sure that the students on your team who you are talking to get the message. That doesn't mean that you need to badger them, 24/7. Have you read this yet? Have you read this yet? Have you read this yet? But it is important that you say, if somebody hasn't responded to something, hey, bump, have you looked over this yet? Or have you filled out this form yet? Things like that can go a long way in helping sort of the flow of things.
So communication does go both ways, obviously. And so as your communicator, you are responsible for also responding to any questions or things like that that come up. Make sure that you are always on alert for those. Like we check our team email every day because we do get questions from parents and we try to respond to those as quickly as possible. Things like that. So we try to be very accountable for those kind of things. So platforms that our team uses for communication, as mentioned before, we do email. We have an email list. We make Google groups for all of our students, our parents, our mentors, and we use those to communicate really big announcements that we really want everybody to hear, such as event announcements, registration is due this day, things like that. We also use Slack. Slack is super popular among teams. I heard a lot of robotics teams have used it. It's basically like a messaging app, but for teams, so that it has a lot of channels built into it and things like that for you to organize our team.
Yeah. So first of all, has anybody here used Slack either for their team or for something else?
There we go.
Okay, so a lot of you have used it for something. How many of you use it for your teams? Okay, cool. So quite a few of you. So Slack is an app designed to streamline messaging and organize it. It sort of was originally designed as sort of somewhere between email and texting, which means that it has features like, conversations, separated conversations like you might have in email, separated by topic, but it also has a more texty feel, if that makes sense, where you send a message and it's instantly received. It's instant messaging instead of an email type thing. It also has a lot of features for integrating with other services that you probably use. For example, Google Drive is a really big one, but if any of your programming teams probably use GitHub, it has integrations for that. So it has sort of little apps that add on to Slack that make it more useful for teams.
Sorry, but for messages that you send on Slack, are there like any character limits for?
No.
Right, so the question was, are there any character limits? I'm realizing that I'm speaking into a microphone, so I do have to say these questions again. So there are no character limits on messages in Slack. So it's not like a Twitter type thing where there is a 140 character limit, which is nice because it allows you to post both short messages and long announcements that you might normally send through email. Slack is organized into channels, is what it calls them. Each channel is supposed to be related to a topic. So, for example, we have a channel for general, which is general announcements that the whole team needs to hear. That channel is only accessible for posting via our leadership team members, but any student on the team can read those messages. We also have a channel for each one of our sub-teams. So robot programming has a channel specific to robot programming. Business and media has a channel specific to business and media. Each of these are sort of for carrying on a conversation about a particular topic. Slack also has DMs, so direct messages, and that's really helpful for if you do not happen to have the phone number of a student on your team, you can always make sure that you contact them.
Slack is also free, so that's super
Yes.
cool. So mainly we use that, and then we use texting for emergencies, like phone calling and texting for if we can't reach someone and we need them right now. But it can be really hard, especially if like a big team or something, to do group chats for your team. So that's why we try to use Slack and try to avoid texting. So we try to make our schedule very transparent to the entire team ahead of time. So we do a lot of our scheduling before in the very beginning of the year, and then have that calendar up and available for all of our team members. So we don't just like pop an event on them the week before, and try to be very transparent about this. So some things that are on our calendar include meeting dates. So we do have weekly routine meetings to make sure that everyone, well, having them being routine is very, very helpful because people know that, oh, even though there was an announcement about it, I know that there is a meeting this Wednesday at 6:30 because there is always a meeting at Wednesday at 6:30. And we also have extra meetings, which are, for emergency kind of things. And those are always announced through both email and Slack to make sure people receive that message. And they're put on the calendar as soon as they get planned. But of course, since they're extra meetings, we don't expect everyone to go to them since it wasn't scheduled beforehand. In addition to regular team meetings, which has everybody come, all the sub-teams, we also have leadership meetings every week for our leadership team. These are held by our 2 head mentors as well as all of our student leaders to discuss issues that have come up, ideas, goals for our year, whether it's concerning our competition or our outreach or the education systems on our team. Anything that arises, we discuss, and we create action items to act upon them, things like that. So for scheduling, as mentioned before, we do use Google Calendar, which is very, very nice since a lot of people can see it. We have that Google Calendar on our website so that everyone can easily view and access it. And we try to refer people back to it so that they know that if they need to see something or if they need to see a scheduled event, they can just go to that Google Calendar. During build season, when things get super hectic, we have a Gantt chart outlining the entire build and competition season with everything that we need to do. So that really helps us, keep on schedule, keep on track. It has things from like when to finish the drivetrain, when to finish this amount of code, when to finish whatever, when to work on things, so that we can always keep on schedule. And we always have something to refer back to. And last thing are announcements. So as said before in communication, when you announce something, you need to be very clear about it, and you need to make sure that people do get that message. Especially if it's for things like extra last-minute meetings, you want to be extremely clear about it so that people understand and you don't just show up to the shop with like 2 people there and wonder where everyone is. So it's extremely important to be very clear on your messages.
So now on to some more logistical online stuff. So Google Drive is a tool that is really important to how our team functions. I'm guessing if not for your teams, if for something else, probably all of you have used Google Drive at some point or another. If not, it's an online collaboration tool for Office suites, sort of like Word and PowerPoint and all of that all rolled into one. But it also is a hosting platform for all of that, which means that all of your files are available online and can be edited by multiple people at the same time. It's really helpful. Pretty much all of our files now are on Google Drive. We don't actually do anything anymore really with PowerPoint, Word, any of that. It's really nice to just have everything in one place and have one latest revision of everything without having to deal with conflicting, oh, I changed this, you changed that. So we do use Google Drive for that. Particularly, something that I'd like to stress is the structure of your Google Drive. So we actually have one team Google Drive folder that we sort of dedicate to all of the files that are related to the team. That means that everything is in there in some way, shape, or form. Now, our system has sort of been built up over a couple of years, and it's very cluttered. This is something that, ideally, if you were to go home and start a Google Drive today, a folder for your team that's shared to your entire team, ideally it's something that you would try to mitigate by creating a dedicated structure for it beforehand. So it doesn't really matter what the structure is, but as long as it's well documented somewhere and written down, if you have a file that's related to programming, it should go here in this subfolder. Right? If you have something that's related to an event, something like a carpool list for an event, for example, it should go here. Things like that can really help in terms of both writing things down, knowing where things should go, but more importantly, being able to find things. So another actually thing that we're finding more and more is really useful is debriefs from students and mentors in the past. So debriefs are, if you've not done a debrief, I would highly recommend it. Go home right after this competition, write up a Capital City Classic debrief. But debriefs are sort of how you are able to pass on information about what happened at a competition or an event, or even over the entire build season, to students in the future. They're really important because FRC is a 4-year rollover event, right? With rare exceptions, you're not going to have students who last 5 years on the team because people graduate. So you don't want to be losing that knowledge every couple of years. So writing debriefs is an important part. That was a bit of a tangent, but was in line with my original idea, which is that it's really important to be able to find the debriefs. Debriefs do nobody any good if you cannot find them at all. So having a consistent drive format can really help with that. And that's something that we are trying to move over toward, the whole consistent drive format thing. Again, like I said, in the past we haven't been the best at this. We're working on reworking our whole drive setup. In terms of how to actually manage the drives, it can be difficult at times. Google doesn't really provide a lot of facilities just because Google Drive wasn't necessarily built from the ground up to work as a team setting in its default form. So Google Drive is free for anybody. If you have a Gmail account, it just comes with that. The problem with that is that that is designed for personal use, which means that whoever makes that folder will belong to that person. Ideally, you'd make it belong to a team Gmail account. Then you have the issues, though, of who do you share it with, right? So Google Drive, you add students or mentors or whatever other people to collaborate to the files. You share the files and folders with them, and that allows them to access the files. Probably most of you know that, but just a review for anybody who doesn't. That's tricky to manage sometimes. Something that works, but I would not recommend, is what's called link sharing, which means that you have a link, there's an online link to the Google Drive, and anybody with that link can just use the Google Drive as a full user of it. That's really tough to manage, though.
That URL, anyone who clicks that URL can use it. So let's say you have a super secret prototyping document that you have all of your plans for your robot on, and you make it open for link sharing, and you share it with one of your alumni, for example, because they are interested. What happens when that alumni shares that URL with the team they're currently mentoring? And now that team has all of your prototyping plans. So for the sake of confidentiality and making sure that we can manage who can see what docs, we always turn link sharing pretty much off.
A more realistic scenario in this, and something that we're actually hitting right now, is the issue of students graduating. Link sharing, if you have shared a document or a folder with students and then they graduate, they will continue to have access to that folder, which means that regardless of whether or not you give them access to that super secret prototyping document, they have access to it and they can read it and share it and do whatever they like with it. This can also get into more serious stuff like financial documents, which you really don't want people outside of the organization who are no longer affiliated with it to be able to edit and use. Link sharing is not the best way of doing it. What is probably the best way of doing it is via Google Groups. So we talked a little bit earlier about Google Groups, using them for sending out massive blasts of emails, sending out a big full team announcement, things like that. Google Groups can also be used for permissions on a Google Drive. So how you do this is a Google Group has an email address that's sort of dedicated to the Google Group. This is the same email address that you would send an email to when you're trying to send stuff to a Google Group, and you can actually just share the folder with that Google Group. So that means that every year when you manage that Google Group, I say Google Group a lot of times and it's starting to not sound like a word, so I apologize there. But when you try to manage that Google Group and take students off and add new students on, those changes will be automatically reflected in the Drive in the Drive's sharing settings. So that's a method that I'd really recommend if you already use Google Drive or you are planning to do so in the future. If you want to get fancy about it, if your team has a nonprofit organization or is associated with a nonprofit. For example, we have a nonprofit branch on Citrus Circuits called DRF, Davis Robotics Foundation. So that's our nonprofit. It's a 501c3 organization. But if you do have an organization like that, and if any of those words make sense to you, you'd be eligible for Google's G Suite product, which is a product that is normally very expensive, but it is free to nonprofits, and it really helps with managing the Google Drive setup in a team context. So it means that you are allowed to create what's called team drives, which are Google Drives that are specifically dedicated to teams. They have a lot of additional features that make it very useful to sort of use in this exact context. So that's something I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because it doesn't necessarily impact all of you, especially if you don't have a 501c3 organization, but if you do, that is something to look into if you are having trouble managing a Google Drive. I just talked a lot about Google Drive, and I am sorry if I bored any of you to death, but if you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask. Yeah.
So for link sharing, are there cases where it's okay or preferable to actually have it?
Yeah.
Right. So link sharing is useful in some cases, yes. In general, you don't want all your documents to be link shared, but if you have one or two documents that should be public, for example, if you are publishing your team handbook online and you want people who haven't necessarily been added to the drive yet, you can definitely add them or add link sharing onto the document and publish it as a link. Yes, that is definitely a good situation for that.
Other examples include like forms that you want everybody to see, such as like meal preferences forms, things like that. That students or parents might not necessarily be on the drive for. Itineraries that you want to share with parents or mentors who might not be on the drive. Those are usually what we use link sharing for.
Actually, Amanda just brought up a quick thing that I was meaning to go over and I forgot to add to the slide. So that is that Google Drive has support built in for online forms. Again, probably some of you have used these in some way, shape, or form, no pun intended, but Google Forms allow you to sort of keep track of who's, checking along with things and also get feedback about things. For example, the biggest form that we have right now is our registration form. That's where every student who's, joining the team inputs their name into a big registration form, right, that contains all the information for all of the team members. Again, that may be less important if you have a small team, but it's something that we've found very useful to track who is actually on the team. Other things that you could use forms for and that we've used forms for in the past are things like confirmation that you'll visit an event or that you'll be at an event. So we send a form out to all of the members of our travel team when we announce that, basically telling people to confirm that they will be at an event.
Or like dietary, allergy restrictions, just basic things like that. Yeah. Or interest forms for outreach. Things like team culture and respect. The big one. So being a leader can be extremely hard sometimes, especially when the people you are working with do not respect you or do not listen to you. So there is a balance to go with this. You don't want to be a complete dictator, bossing people around, but you don't want to be a doormat and let everyone just roll over you. So you do need to find a balance in that. The biggest thing is that you need to have respect for your teammates, because if you have respect for your teammates will eventually learn to gain respect for you. Gain your respect. That's what I meant. English. So gaining respect is not like an overnight process. It is something that you have to build up and something that you have to show in your actions and in the way you present yourself. So most importantly is that you want to be a role model. You want to be the student that people look up to when they have questions or they don't know what to do. You want to be that person. So you want to be professional. You don't want to just goof around and joke around and be, the bad troublemaker that everybody doesn't want. You need to set that kind of ground expectation. You need to be very responsible. You need to be accountable. You need to be positive. That's another thing. Having a negative team leader leading and organizing things with a very negative tone can set a very bad precedent for the entire sub-team. So it's very important that you keep a positive, enthusiastic attitude, that all of your instruction and all of your feedback is also very positive, things like that. And you also want to be transparent. That's a good way to, not be a dictator that just pop rules out wherever. You want to be transparent in that kind of way.
So yeah, all of your students should be kept in the loop about major team things. If you're thinking about, a particular set of changes to things, it's always great to have an announcement about that and just keep students informed about not only the decisions that end up getting made, but the rationale behind those decisions. And that can go a long way towards improving team culture. People tend to get frustrated if they don't actually know why the decisions that are being made are being made. Oftentimes, as leaders, you'll have decisions that are sound with your rationale for them, but without that, they don't necessarily make sense at first sight. So it's really great to share that rationale with the students on your team when you announce decisions.
Wait, does anybody have any questions about this? No? Oh, good. Sounds good.
So now comes a tough one. How do you pick future leaders? It's really tough. Yes, that is probably the only answer. Some things about how we've done it in the past is first identifying potential. So the process of deciding who's going to be a leader isn't necessarily an instantaneous, you're doing it right now and this is how it's going to be. It's a process of watching people, watching how they respond to stress, watching how their attitude is shaped and evolves over a year or many years, and it's watching how they take initiative for things. You also want to try your best to avoid favoritism. You want to be completely impartial, which is why when you are a leader and you are selecting the next set of leaders, it's important to have multiple people being the ones making that decision. Any one person making that decision lends itself really easily to having that favoritism aspect kick in, and that's never good for anybody. It's not good for the team. It's not good for leaders who were overlooked because of the one favorite, and it's really not good for the favorite person, the chosen one, I suppose. Just because if you put somebody in a role that they are not ready for, it's gonna be very difficult for them, and they're going to go through a lot of stress. So yeah, it is very important to be impartial. How we actually run our sort of process of leadership selection is as follows. So throughout the entire year, the leadership members, the core leadership members specifically, keep a close eye on students who we think are potential candidates for future leaders. That doesn't mean that these are the only people in consideration for leadership. They're just sort of a running tally, a mental tally of who you think might be good for the role. Throughout the season, you can sort of look at them, evaluate how they're doing, what sort of decisions they're making when they do have the chance to make decisions. All of those things just factor into it. At the end of the year, right after the competition season and all of that is done winding down, we have our leadership nomination process. So this is a Google form, actually, that the students on the team sign and fill out, and that sort of allows everybody to make recommendations about who they think would be good for leaders. It's really important to get this because you want to get some feedback on what you think would be a good leader, right? You might be overlooking students who everybody else on the team sees as great leaders, but might be a little bit more working behind the scenes to make sure things get done. So it is important to get feedback from the whole team on who they think would be good leaders. After that, we hold interviews. This is basically the core team, so myself, Amanda, Mr. Harvey, who disappeared, and Michael Corsetto. All of us sort of gather and talk not one-on-one, four-on-one, I suppose, with potential leadership candidates and discuss how they'd respond to certain situations, why they think they would be a good leader, what they think could be improved on the team, sort of trying to get a gauge of how they think in terms of leadership, how they would respond. Every year we do a hypothetical question for the students who are being interviewed, and that sort of gives us a gauge of how they could respond to a situation. So things like that. This isn't necessarily something where you should try to spring tricky questions on people. It is primarily for you to get a gauge of how they are going to be able to perform in that role. So again, it's not a test, it's sort of a conversation.
And then at the very end, after we've gathered all the nominations and we've taken notes from all the interviews, we gather together, we discuss, we have a very big discussion about it. If we have, we also ask any of the graduating leads who they would like as their quote unquote successor, who they think would be a good person for the role, just to get their opinion on it since they worked closely with them. So it's a very big discussion, and at the very end of it, we announce it and we basically shift leadership and have the old leads kind of run through things with the new leads and then let the new leads take everything on.
Another thing is just confirming with the people that have been chosen that they are willing to perform the roles that they've been stuck with now. So you don't want to just, spring that on them without telling them and without giving them a chance to respond. That can be really tough. If somebody is sort of given a leadership role that they don't feel that they're ready for, it's important that you discuss that with them, try to take that into consideration. If you feel strongly that somebody would be a good leader, but they feel like they're not going to have time for it or they're not ready, it's great to take those into consideration. Also, if you have people signed up for, or not signed up, but selected for more than one leadership role, it's really good to make sure you have confirmation that they're willing to do that. In general, it's good to try to avoid having people in more than one leadership role. That's a bit of a stressor, but it's good to avoid. All right, that's actually all we have scheduled for this talk, but we do have some time allocated for just discussion. So, yes, so first, does anybody have any additional questions that they didn't get the chance to ask during the whole presentation? All right, and then the other half of this is, does anybody have any topics that they feel like are different on their team or they want to talk about that we didn't get to at all? Things that they want to discuss. If not, I do have one that I actually kind of want to hear how other teams do because it's something that we've sort of struggled with. So, yeah.
Does your head coach have the final decision of who gets the leadership position?
So, short answer is no. Long answer is it's a little bit trickier than that. In general, our head coach does sort of have veto power if that's Mr. Harvey, by the way. If he strongly believes that a student would not be qualified for a role, he also has veto power over the selection of travel team, because if he doesn't think that a student would be able to, because he's legally responsible for those students at competitions, so if he doesn't want those students to be, legally on that trip, then he has the final say in that. In general, though, there is no final say on it. It's almost always a consensus.
So our core leadership team, the way we try to approach it is that all four members have basically an equal say. It's not mentors and then students, it's try to be mentors on the same footing as students. So our mentors understand that, and our mentors understand and respect our opinions and will listen to something if we have to say for it. So in the end, it's more of a discussion than I have an opinion, but your opinion overrules that kind of thing.
Right.
And so our mentors understand that, and we try to enforce that a lot, basically.
So yeah, the thing I was talking about, the sort of veto power, that is almost never used. It's really just there as a technicality. It is almost always a consensus, a discussion, and if there's a disagreement between the members of core leadership, we discuss that and try to work it out. Any other questions?
So, our team currently does not have a mentor. How do your team feel about getting a mentor?
So we do a lot of recruiting around our community. We're very lucky in that our town is a college town, and we have a university right next to us. So we do a lot of our kind of recruiting there. Sometimes we get graduate students or just undergraduate students who maybe specialize in that field and are interested in coming. We definitely try to aim toward the FRC alumni in those departments and things like that. Try to get them. I would start for your team with a teacher are you a community team or a school team?
School team.
Yeah, then I would definitely try to aim for a teacher who would be cool with kind of helping out with your team. Definitely approaching them and saying that you don't have to babysit us, but you please like be our mentor and support us and help us guide us through these decisions. Yeah, so being at a school really helps with that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a STEM teacher either, just a teacher that you think would be very supportive of you and wouldn't just flake out in the middle of build season or something like that.
Any other questions? All right. In that case, I have something I want to hear your guys' opinions on. So this will just sort of be a discussion. I want to talk about training. How do you guys all approach training your new students? Do you guys have a formal, sort of setup for that? Or do you have, they are self-guided or what? I just want to hear.
Okay, so for us, over the summer, like all the returning members, we kind of do most of our like full certifications. So like our core leadership team, like they learn from like the mentors and they kind of like teach us. And then when we get our new student, like our incoming students or whatever for the team, like for me, I was one of like the people who tool certified people because I learned from over the summer. And then we had like 4 or 5 people who were like dedicated, worked a lot in the shop and stuff, and we trained other people. And like we like each picked a couple tools and we kind of like made sure we knew everything about the tools and we were able to teach it to other people. And that's kind of how we trained our incoming members.
So sort of you're training your returning members over the summer with additional training, and then you're training your incoming members right as the season starts?
Yeah.
Type thing?
And another thing that we do is, last year that we did over the fall, we would dedicate a special day, say Monday, and each day someone from leadership or a mentor would have a presentation, say something about pneumatics or electrical systems, how to work with SolidWorks.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, do you guys have all of the new students on your team go through all of the training?
We have like a spreadsheet and it has like every like tool that we use in our shop like listed, and we mark it off so that way like, we know who's done what and who still needs to do what, so that way they can like have everything, they kind of have basic knowledge of everything before they start working on the robot. Okay,
and are you guys organized into sub-teams where you do have students specializing in programming or something like that, or?
Yeah, we have like a core like leadership team, which is like four people, and they are like kind of in charge, like there's mechanical lead, like and stuff like that, and then we have like 6 or 7 students or something, and we're like sub-leadership, so we're like more dedicated members to help take on leadership roles, because our team, like we like pretty much doubled in size from last year.
From 2 years, we went from like 15 to 50.
Yeah, like my freshman year there was like 12 people, and then last year it was like 30 people, and then this year we had like 60. So we kind of had to include the sub-leadership team to like do that, and then we were kind of the people who train people.
Okay.
Oh, so for us, we hold this is for build, because we also have different sub-teams, but we hold like mini classes too for the students. So like veteran members teach new incoming people who've been like accepted onto the team. We do like mini classes, and then we also do like safety, like so they have to pass like safety tests and stuff, especially those working with tools.
Cool. So you guys do like a selection process for who gets to join the team?
Oh yeah, we have applications and stuff.
And how many students do you have on the team?
Right now we have 40 something.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of people apply because we're like a school team.
Right. I was just curious because that's something we've talked about and considered doing, but we've sort of opted to not do. And I'm sort of just curious to hear experiences of teams who have.
I don't like the application selection thing, but I know it's for the best because if we have like too many people on the team, not everyone gets to like participate and like get the most out of it.
Yeah. Yes, Tyler.
So obviously this won't be about being part of Citrus, but on other teams I've worked with, like 2085, it's a high emphasis on hands-on experience, usually over the summer in the subdivisions to further develop those personal relationships that you're going to be in high-stress situations in build season. For example, the lead engineer is working hands-on with those new freshman engineers coming in, so that way they're learning the tools, they're learning the process, and they're building those personal relationships. And on top of that, we usually have a game that we design or come up with to give them a...
So you guys do like a mock kickoff, mock game?
You got it.
That's cool.
So our team has always been a small team, but this offseason we started with 8 veterans and no rookies coming in, and then we now have 27 right now. And the veterans kind of met and discussed things we wanted to do going into the offseason with training, because we had a lot of people want to join the team as trainees and join as members. So what we did is we the very first day we just kind of told them all about the team, explained what we did, and then as we went in more into the off season, we like one day we like did like little like workshops, and every student cycled through different areas that we have, like business, programming, prototyping, etc. And they got to kind of like figure out kind of what they wanted to do maybe as an idea. And then from there on out, they worked on like small little projects, like we saved our kitbot, and then we had a whole group work on a kitbot. We had people take our last year's robot and design a whole new mechanism for one thing. And we just kind of went around and did different things to like just train them. And then we also did safety quizzes, and where there was like a whole safety presentation, and everyone had to pass the quiz with a 70% or better. Everyone passed, so. And it was like 20 questions, really easy, just something so they kind of get a general idea.
All right. So I realized that I asked that and I didn't talk about what we do on 1678.
Don't take this as the right answer, by the way. Just pretend.
Yeah, so this is just a thing that we do. So our first meeting of the year actually is what we call our recruitment day meeting, and that's where all of our new students come, and or not our first meeting, but our first meeting that we're open to new students. They come and they rotate through all the different sub-teams to get a feel for each of them, kind of like what you were saying. After that, they sort of choose which sub-team they want to. It's not necessarily a final decision, but they usually stick to the same sub-team. And then it's separated into sub-teams for our sort of training sessions. The different sub-teams work in different ways, but almost all of our student training is student-run. Our programming is sort of a curriculum that me and the app programming lead, we have 2 programming sub-teams, which is probably not necessarily applicable, but we put together a full programming curriculum. And in general, throughout this process, we start with a lot of students and end with still a lot, but a slightly smaller lot. Just because students leave, they decided that, it sounded really fun, but it's a lot of work. They have realized that they have other commitments because high school is a lot of work, things like that.
On business and media, since we have to teach so much, and they're all different things, from like finances to how to edit a video, we basically have little workshops that we hold during team meetings that are about half the team meeting. So we separate them into like categories: easy, intermediate, advanced. We have some that are mandatory, such as public speaking or writing basics. And then we also have some really advanced ones, like how to use Adobe Photoshop, things like that. And then we let people, they have to go to the mandatory ones, but then they get to choose which ones they go to after that. We highly encourage that they go to all of them, but we don't force everyone to go into everything, since we know that someone who's super into writing may not be, really interested in photography or things like that. But that's not very applicable to like programming, for instance, because programming you probably should learn as much as possible, whereas business media, there are so many different things that are completely unrelated to each other that it's not like it's not easy to learn all of them. So that's why we gotta let them choose.
You say my job's easier than yours? Is that what you're saying? All right. Looks like okay. Yeah.
You said that after your recruitment day, they get to choose which sub-teams that they're going into. And does that work better? Or because what we do on our team is like freshman year, you kind of like learn everything, and then after that you kind of go into what you're more passionate about. So why did you guys choose to like?
So okay, I think I can answer this one better because you weren't on the team my freshman year.
I wanted to join programming. That's what I'm doing now.
So my freshman year, we actually did something sort of like that, not for the full freshman year, but for at least for a few months. So our training season was actually sort of a rotation through a bunch of different training modules. What we ended up finding is that the sub-team leads who were teaching that felt like they were too rushed because they had to fit enough to give people a good taste, but also keep it to an actual training, keep it to training levels so that you're actually training people in some things. You had to do all of that in like 2 weeks, or a little more than 2 weeks depending on the sub-team. I think programming got like 2 weeks, but electrical got like 2 days, and mechanical got like 4 weeks. So it was really tough to actually manage all that, and students ended up with probably a better idea of what they wanted to do, but that was a lot of time that got spent with students not really knowing how to do this stuff. Our goal is to have students be able to actively contribute to whatever sub-team they're on, be it programming, electrical, mechanical, or business media, their first year, right after those training exercises and all the training is done. And so we felt that that sort of took a large chunk out of that.
Currently what we do is that, with the recruitment day, we have rotations of all the sub-teams there so that they can, go through, learn what each sub-team is about, get a general idea. Once meetings start, when we start training, we do totally allow people to kind of sub-team hop, and a lot of our students do that. Some of our students come in like, I have to be a programmer. This is my lifelong destiny. And they go and do programming. Some of our students do sub-team hopping. Personally, I joined the team and I was like, I totally want to do programming. And I did it for 2 days and I was like, this is not for me. So I joined business media and I found my place there. So we totally encourage people to go and try out different things, especially in the first few meetings where it's not super in-depth training, but basic training. Them missing those first few training sessions isn't, dire or critical. It also lets them get a good taste of what they're going into.
Sorry, you've been raising your hand for a little while and I forgot to get to you, but.
Sure, that's fine. So what our team does for teaching new students will come in over the summer and we have weekly evening classes on different days for each sub-team, mechanical, electrical programming, also scouting, but they just do their own thing. And so students will attend as many of those as they like. It's taught by mentors and senior students. When it comes to the on-season, we try and have older students essentially lead a project, but then have newer students actually do a lot of the work on that project. So in that way, students will have learned like SolidWorks basics, and then they'll actually apply it during the full season. So some of the stuff that might be taught over the summer is like programming basics, so Java, syntax stuff, all that, or also shop safety, which we tend to do on the weekends to make more time. Because students do shop safety pretty much all at the same time, I think we might have like brief tests on stuff, but it's not like here's this big test at the end of things. And so then they're actually able to use the machinery during the on-season when we're doing manufacturing and stuff. So in that way, stuff started in summer, and then they apply it during the actual season. During the off-season, what we have older students do is they will run their own off-season projects, such as like working on our off-season robot, for example, for CCC. So that will essentially mirror the on-season schedule. It's just that they might not necessarily be working on an actual robot, maybe just a specific mechanism or concept they want to work on.
So you run training over the summer then?
Yes.
And that's for your new members, right? Mm-hmm. How do you get new members actually interested in that sort of pre the season?
So right now, it's pretty ethereal. Our team is small enough where we tend to have students that sort of spontaneously hear about the team. Because we're in a couple different schools, but it's...
All in the claim memberships on about it, basically.
That's true. One of the main mentors who is most connected with one of the main schools that we work with, she talks a lot about it. And so the students who hear about it are invited to come to some of our initial training sessions. So like if they're interested in programming, show up to programming. If they're interested in electrical, show up to our electrical meetings. Other than that, they can attend as many or as few as they want. And then from there, if they have enough skills, they can just jump right into the season and get working on stuff.
And how effective have you found that in terms of actually getting people up to speed?
It seems to work okay. For stuff like SolidWorks training and mechanical and electrical and like machining stuff, that all is pretty much down. Programming, that's something we're still working on, but I think the same model pretty much applies.
All right. So I think we're actually sort of running out of time. That's
We're
what.
going overtime, yeah. So if you want to leave, you're totally welcome. We're not forcing you to stay here. But if you have more questions, we'll still be here. Kind of might have to go back to Pitt.
No, I'm fine.
But I'll still be here, and we can answer any questions one-on-one, or if you want to stay here and keep talking, we can just keep talking like this. But thank you, everyone who came.